Good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Seems we've got a few more popping in, so we'll start off with some housekeeping notes so we get our last few attendees logged in here. Throughout our presentation, if you have questions, please make use of the Q&A window and make sure that we track your questions and answer them. If you do enter a question in the chat, we may not capture that and answer that question. So make use of that Q&A window, and we'll be sure to answer any questions you have as we proceed through our presentation today. Today's topic, be talking about the envelope envelope requirements that have been updated in the 2021 IECC. We picked out the top 10 kind of most important ones that we wanted to cover today, and we'll be starting there. We are a preferred education provider with the International Code Council, and we do offer continuing education credits through AIA. So once this presentation is concluded, you'll receive an email with a certificate of attendance, and that email will have a form link in it. Click on that form link, enter your AIA member number, and we'll be sure to get those credits turned in for you. So as far as the topics we're going to cover today, things we want to achieve with our presentation, first, we're going to be understanding the changes in the updated Illinois Conservation Code between the 2018 up to the 2021 IECC. We're going to identify the 10 most important Illinois Energy Conservation Code compliance issues in the commercial envelope provisions. We're going to understand how to comply with those provisions for commercial envelope design and construction, and identify the proposed Illinois amendments and their potential impact on the commercial building efficiency. So who we are here at CDAC, we assist buildings and communities in achieving energy efficiency, saving money, and becoming more sustainable. Our overall goal is to reduce the energy footprint of Illinois and beyond. And the Energy Codes training is one of the programs we have that helps us obtain that goal. We help facilities become more energy efficient. We conduct educational webinars such as this one. We do some research, and we advocate for a greener future throughout the state and beyond. Today's Energy Code training is sponsored by the Illinois State Energy Office at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and we thank them for their continued support of these training programs. We do offer technical support if you have questions about the Energy Code or any of the information we cover today or any of our past webinars. You can reach out to us through technical support at energycode@illinois.edu by email. We also have a 1-800 number if you have a quick question, need a quick answer. You can call us there. We do prefer email as a means to receive that information. We can take your question, talk amongst all the members of our team in the office and make sure we get you the best answer possible. It's a little more difficult to do that with a phone call, but we can also do that as well. We also host a number of online resources at smartenergy.illinois.edu/energy-code, including previous workshops and webinars, a schedule of our upcoming events, and online on-demand training modules that are self-paced modules, generally geared for introductory audiences, to help you understand the Energy Code and its requirements. As far as the Illinois Energy Conservation Code's update cycle, we are getting fairly close to when we expect the 2021 IECC will be effective. This is an older screen. October 1st was the original date a few months ago. It's now been pushed back to December 1st as the potential date where the code will be in effect as far as updating to the 2021 IECC. So for planning purposes, that December 1st date is what we're looking at currently. On our website, again, we have a single page. It has links to all our resources and all our support services. So it's a one-stop shop for all your Energy Code needs, and that should be helpful. especially if you're looking to access the code. We've got direct links to the IECC 2021 most current edition. When the Illinois amendments are approved, we'll have a link to those updated on our website, so you'll have direct access to those. And for those of you in the Chicago area, we also have a link to the Chicago Energy Conservation Code. Today's webinar is part of a series going over the top 40 requirements for the 2021 update in the IECC. We did an in-person presentation that's been completed down in Southern Illinois. We have one coming up in DuPage County in June. We also will have a webinar in next month going over the importance of mechanical insulation, including safety and efficiency. We'll have a guest speaker from the industry helping us with that presentation. So please join us for that one. Should be an interesting event. Today's webinar is part of a series breaking out the individual portions of the code into smaller, more digestible chunks. We've already talked about residential. It's been archived and is available on our website. Today we're talking about commercial envelope, and in the future we'll be touching on lighting and HVAC. So at this point, we just want to get a quick idea of who is joining us today before we dive into our content. So if you could, let us know what your profession is. That'll help us understand our audience a bit better. Okay, looks like we've got most of our responses in. We'll go ahead and share that. It's like the grand majority of us are architects, some engineers and code officials, and a scattering of some others. So thank you for joining us today. At this point, I will turn it over to Ryan to touch on our first few topics for the day.
Well, thank you, Sean. So here's kind of an overview of the 10 areas that we're going to be looking at, beginning with specifically exemptions from the Illinois Energy Code, then moving on through the certificates, touching on some equipment, buildings, and insulation minimums for the envelope and doors. Tapered insulation is that's been a notable change in how that has been. Fenestration and air barrier compliance, that's another major change. And then operable openings, interlock, and some additional efficiency measures has been changed from the 2018 to the 2021 IECC. So with us covering the commercial envelope today, residential envelope would be back in the residential section. Again, as Sean noted, that webinar has been archived and is available on our website for viewing. So if you missed that, you can go back and view that. So first, looking at buildings that are exempt from the Illinois Energy Code. The Illinois Energy Conservation Code is based on the International Energy Conservation Code. So understanding that that's a little bit, when someone says IECC, that could be either the International or the Illinois. But the International Energy Conservation Code is not adopted by itself. It is adopted as part of the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. So one of the primary areas that are exempt are buildings that are exempt from locally adopted building codes. Typically, as noted here, these are agricultural facilities here in Illinois. So as these grain silos and barn here would not typically have a locally adopted building code that apply to them. Therefore, the Illinois Energy Conservation Code would not apply. But check with your local jurisdiction as far as where they do or do not apply specifically for you. Another large carve out is for buildings that do not contain conditioned spaces. So some of those examples might be unconditioned storage facilities. And as pictured here, a press box for a sports viewing area may be exempt from the energy code if it does not contain conditioned space. So if it has air conditioners or heaters in it for space heating, then those would be conditioned and may be subject to the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. So something to be aware of is in this example showing a press box, we don't see any air conditioning and anticipating that there's no heating presently in this space. However, if that status changes and you are calling yourself exempt from the energy codes and therefore not building to the standards set forth in the energy codes, and you later change to make it conditioned, you lose the grandfathering in that, and therefore the envelope would have to be brought up to the standard at that time, whatever the standard is at that time, and so on and so forth. So that is something to be aware of if a building is going to be exempted as not containing conditioned space and therefore not subject to the energy code. If that changes, then the envelope will have to be brought into compliance at that time. Another common area that we will field this question regarding is warehouse, where you're doing the core or the shell is being constructed, but there's no conditioning being done as part of the initial development, and that will be handled at a future time. If you exempt it as being unconditioned, then when that core is filled in and occupied, then the building envelope would have to be upgraded to meet the energy code. So we do recommend, if there is any chance that it will be conditioned, go ahead and design and build the envelope to meet the standards of the energy code at that time. Saves a lot of headaches and money later. So we talked a little bit about no comfort conditioning. The Illinois Administrative Code, which helps provide information regarding information regarding how the code does or doesn't apply, or conditions therefore, it presumes that there is no conditioning if the electric service is 100 amps or less. If the electrical service is greater than 100 amps, 100 and a quarter, or even 200 or bigger, then the energy code assumes or presumes that the building will be comfort conditioned. So that will be a code official. If you wish to say that there's no comfort conditioning and you have electrical service above 100 amps, the code official will need to sign off and state that yes, that this electrical service is not for comfort conditioning, and that the sizing is just for the other loads that are there. So another area that we see is historic buildings. Illinois does exempt buildings that are listed on the national or state historic registers or designated by authorized personnel as historically significant. So while those buildings may be exempted from the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, it is good practice, particularly for comfort and other benefits that do go along with compliance with energy code, to bring those into compliance as best as you can. The International Energy Conservation Code does have a provision in there. So even if you do try to comply fully with the International Energy Conservation Code, it does have an exemption for areas of buildings that are historically significant. So here showing the Tiffany's Dome in downtown Chicago, being that has a specific historical significance, you might not make improvements to that, but that would not necessarily preclude, adding insulation to other areas of the building where it may be beneficial and not detrimental to the historical significance of that area. So And here's some of the language of the International Energy Conservation Code, and noting that, if you are going to not fully comply or not use traditional prescriptive compliance, then making a note as far as how you have tried to comply to the best of the best of your ability, and calling out areas where you've not been able to meet the full requirements, such that compliance would threaten, degrade, or destroy the historic form, fabric, or function of that building. So again, that's where just being able to document this such that if someone comes back later and questions something, it has it clearly documented as far as, hey, here's what we were looking to do, and here's why we didn't want to necessarily. Here we're looking at a very nice historic building, and trying to bring those windows up to the current fenestration U factors might be extremely difficult or very problematic, but you may be able to improve the current windows to the best of their functional ability. So something else that is required now for commercial, this previously, you may have seen this in the residential requirements, but this is now coming to commercial, is the requirements for a thermal envelope certificate. So we do have a form that is now available on our website. So for those new construction projects, you can either develop your own certificate or use the one through CDAC. And it calls out several aspects that have to be on it. So obviously the different R values for your component parts, your ceiling or roof, your walls, floors, ducts, etc. And for the fenestration, what is the U factor and solar heat gain coefficient? And the results from the building envelope air leakage testing that is becoming required now as well. So a primary benefit of having this certificate, these certificates would be located traditionally in a mechanical room, be it in the basement or wherever your primary mechanical equipment systems are, such that, if you do have a window that breaks later or something gets damaged, being able to know what the original design was allows you to quickly make a repair that is appropriate but not detrimental to the performance of the building over time. And so, owners may otherwise have this information, but typically that's going to be in a spec book or a cut sheet, operations and maintenance binder that may easily get lost or take notable time to locate and dig that information out. So by having this certificate clearly displayed in the mechanical room, makes it real quick and easy for reference for maintenance and repair in the future. So noted we do have some different resources. We do have both a checklist and energy certificate for commercial and residential on our website. You'll see that the residential one was posted earlier this summer, and the commercial envelope was posted this fall. So fairly recent additions with that. And so just want to check a few things before we proceed on too far through a couple of more poll questions. First being a statement, a grain silo operation is required to comply with the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. Is that true or false? And number two, the commercial compliance certificate is required to have which of the following? Envelope R values, fenestration performance, HVAC performance, and lighting power density. You may choose up to all four or as few as one.
Get that a few more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and share those results.
All right, excellent. People did pick up that grain silos being agriculture would not be required to comply with the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. So good job on that. And most people did pick up on the two that are required for this certificate: envelope R values, fenestration performance, and the third item was the air tightness, but that would not be HVAC performance, and lighting power density is not on there either. So overall, pretty good on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean to talk about equipment and envelopes.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. So looking at equipment building requirements first, there's a minor update here in the energy code for the 2021 version. They've increased the applicable floor area from 500 square feet to 1,200 square feet. So they're letting these buildings be a little bit larger and still qualify as equipment buildings. But then has to house electric equipment not less than 7 watts per square foot and not intended for human occupancy. Heating system capacity not greater than 1,700 or 17,000 BTUs per hour with a set point restricted to 50 degrees Fahrenheit or less. An average wall and roof U factor of not less than 0.2 U value there for climate zones 1 through 5. So again, for these equipment buildings, it's primarily, kind of like radio tower boxes, maybe some electrical switch gear buildings, things like that. They're not usually going to have offices or anything in them, so people aren't going to be occupying these spaces. They're just housing electronic equipment. And so there are some other requirements here just to make sure the size of the building is relatively small. A limit on heating. Most of the heating for this space is going to come off of that electrical equipment in that space. So you shouldn't need a large heating system in these spaces. And you're not heating it to comfort conditions anyway. So they put that 50 degree Fahrenheit or less temperature limit on those requirements as well. But those are all original to the 2018 IECC. The major update is that square footage requirement. They're allowing those buildings to be slightly larger now. So next, looking at our envelope insulation minimums. These are the requirements. We've pulled together the R value tables here. The green boxes on this table are indicating where they've actually had some increases in the performance requirements for that insulation value. We've put the original 2018 values in parentheses beneath the 2021 requirements here so that you have a single reference. Excuse me. But you can see for most parts of the commercial building, the envelope requirements have not changed, but we've had some requirements for increased insulation in attic spaces in commercial buildings, bumped up from R30 to R49 there. Metal buildings and metal frame buildings have had some increases, particularly in climate zone 5, mainly accounting for increased continuous insulation to break thermal bridging and get better performance out of that metal framing by ensuring it's completely broken from the exterior environment. And then some slight changes for wood framed walls and below grade walls for residential style group R occupancies. Moving on to floors. For this area, some minor updates for mass floors and unheated slabs as far as insulation requirements have been increased slightly. We do want to note here, even though it hasn't been updated to a higher level, but for heated slab on grade construction, insulation is permitted to stop at the bottom of the slab edge when that insulation is continuous with the under slab insulation. You've got a continuous thermal break there, so you don't need to continue that perimeter insulation down to the depth listed in the table. However, if you've got exterior slab insulation that isn't connected to under slab insulation for some reason, then you would need to go that full depth. There was a requirement in the R value tables for swinging doors that has been moved to the U factor table in the 2021 IECC. So let's take a quick look at those U factor tables. Again, these align with the R value adjustments for the most part. Again, the green cells are where the values have increased, and the value in parentheses underneath is the 2018 value. So these align with the R value requirements that we've seen already. But this next screen here, you can see the non-swinging doors that's got moved from the R value table to the U factor table. And they have been relaxed slightly. Those U factor requirements are a little bit lower if you do 1 over that U factor to get the R value than what they were in the 2018 IECC. They're now about an R3.3 or so, as opposed to the original R4.75. Also, the 2021 IECC did a little bit of correction on the heated slab U factor or F factor requirements in this table, accounting for alignment more with the ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix A definitions. So while there isn't a 2-part requirement, as you can see there for the 2018 IECC values in parentheses, they had an F factor for the underslab and an F factor for the perimeter. That's all been combined into a single F factor for the heated slab to bring the 2021 IECC in alignment with ASHRAE 90.1. But it's not necessarily a loss in efficiency there like it is with the doors. So looking at the door requirements, there's been some slight expansion here for the 2021 IECC. Opaque doors shall comply with table listed values and be considered as part of the gross area of the above grade walls. So there's a little bit of clarification added there in that text. Opaque non-swinging doors, horizontally hinged sectional doors with a single row of fenestration. This detail has been added in for climate zone 0 through 6, should have a U factor of less than 0.44. And then all other doors should comply with the U factor table and solar heat gain coefficient requirements. So they've added a little bit of clarification in some of the door location definitions and considerations, whether they're fenestration or above grade wall. And then a little bit more requirements for horizontally hinged doors, garage doors with a row of fenestration in them. They've added in that U factor 0.44 requirement there. Looking at some specific envelope insulation requirements, there's been some clarification and simplification in the 2021 IECC. Mainly looking here at the tapered roof assemblies. We had some questions last year about the language in the 2018 IECC for how tapered insulation should be applied to ceilings or insulated roof decks. The 2021 has done a great job of clarifying that and simplifying that language. So for the average R value can be used for tapered roof insulation. There used to be language in the 2018 IECC that your tapered insulation could vary an inch, and that would count as an average R value, but any variation beyond an inch, so if you had a 2-inch thick taper, only that first inch would count towards your average R values. So they've removed that. It's just a simple tapered R value. The minimum thickness has been simplified to just has to be 1 inch across the entire roof deck. You have to have at least that inch of insulation. You have to have a minimum of 2 staggered layers, except at these specific locations. Gutter edges, drains, and scuppers are allowed to have a single layer of insulation there. C402.1.4.1.1 of the 2021 IECC was added in. It's essentially a restatement of the R value compliance that's listed here, but for U factors. Some should be approximately the same application. They just have broken those out into two separate sections for R factor and U factor requirements. So I think at this point, we've got another poll question to pull up. Which envelope component had requirements slightly relaxed in the 2021 IECC? Was that window U factors, non-swinging door insulation, heated slab edge insulation depth, wood framed wall insulation? And then for tapered roof insulation, what is the minimum allowable thickness? Is it 1 inch everywhere, 2 inches everywhere, 1 inch except at specified locations, or 2 inches except at specified locations? And we've had a couple of questions come into the Q&A. We'll touch on the air leakage requirements in a bit here, so we'll leave that one active until we answer it, but we'll be addressing that one soon. For equipment buildings, what about air conditioning for the electrical equipment? The energy code does not state a limit on the air conditioning sizing. It does have that equipment watt per density listed in there. And so you would have to properly size the air conditioning equipment for the loads in that space. But outside of that, the energy code doesn't have specific requirements to qualify as an equipment building for the specific envelope exceptions. And when you get into the HVAC section of the code that we'll talk about in our next webinar, the requirements for proper equipment sizing and things like that would still apply for air conditioning. And then the last question that we had come in before we close our poll here, assuming U factors equals U values, yes. For the U factors included in the code, I believe those do include air films. Those are coming from the ASHRAE 90.1 supplemental documentation. And those typically do include the air films for those materials. And so you would not count those separately and add them into those required U values. Okay, let's go ahead and end our poll here and share those results. So for question number 1, looks like most people caught on. Yes, it was the non-swinging door insulation that had slightly relaxed requirements in the 2021 IECC. The others are either the same or slightly more stringent as the 2018. And then for tapered roof insulation, that minimum thickness is 1 inch everywhere. As far as the specific locations, that only refers to whether you can have a single layer of insulation or 2 layers, but you must have a minimum of 1 inch across the entire roof deck for above deck tapered insulation. And with that, I believe we'll be turning it back over to Ryan to talk about the next sections.
All right. And one other question that did come in that I do want to touch on before we get too far away, that is also tapered insulation. There was a question about is it allowing the average insulation to meet the R value or U factor tables? And that is correct. That's what Sean did say, that it is allowing for the average must comply. Typically, we do see in tapered insulation applications frequently the average is notably above that requirement already, just by the sheer tapering of the insulation as set forth, as far as the minimum all the way up to that maximum. That average is commonly above. But if you do have a smaller low slope roof with tapered insulation, it may be such that you're going to need more than that 1 inch minimum in order to achieve your required R value for that. So good catch on that. With that, we're going to move over to fenestration a bit. One of the biggest changes that the code did this cycle was previously the solar heat gain coefficients that were required were based on the were based on the direction of the fenestration. and it is now changed to, is it fixed or operable fenestration? Operable, they did also increase the requirements. They did increase the stringency a little bit for operable, or made it a little more flexible for operable versus fixed. But that's a primary change, is moving from directionally based requirements to fixed or operable fenestration. So this is something that's in ASHRAE 90.1 that has been a proposed Illinois amendment that we are anticipating being accepted. And what this is if you have substantial fenestration that is east and west, east or west facing, then the required solar heat gain coefficients do have to be increased proportionally. So here at this building, we see this facility has a large expansive east-facing glass, and so needing to improve the solar heat gain coefficient performance, such that when you get that morning, that morning sunlight in, or conversely, if you had west-facing fenestration, that afternoon sun, trying to limit that increase in air conditioning loading just from that strong solar gain for east and west. And so this does make it such that you do have to proportionally improve that solar heat gain coefficient performance. So if you have twice as much glass or twice as much glazing, then you're going to need double the performance or half the solar heat gain for that. So something to be aware of. Again, this is a proposed amendment, but we are anticipating this will be accepted and adopted into the Illinois amendments for that. So something else is for minimum skylight area. It did change how you determine some of this, rather than just doing visible transmittance of 0.4. They also have an annual visible transmittance threshold of 0.26. Understanding because the sun may move, or you may have, with now more dynamic glazing areas and seeing more dynamic skylights, understanding that during the middle of the day when the sun is brightest, that dynamic glazing is going to reduce its visible transmittance and perhaps improve its performance during those brightest hours. And similarly, looking at for standard skylights, they had a specific threshold, and now they've added a requirement for tubular skylights, as we're seeing more and more of those coming in as the costs come down and the detailing requirements get easier on some of those. And as people have realized the benefits of bringing in more and more daylight on occupants, there's been a push towards that. So air barrier compliance. This is one that has been a very large change for this. So while it's understanding that it has been allowed that the materials can be, your air barrier can be, or air control layer, as industry may prefer, can be installed on the inside, outside, or as part of the envelope assembly. Sometimes when you do end up with assemblies, be it structural insulated panels or precast insulated concrete, or any number of factory made assemblies, the air barrier can be part of that assembly. So also understanding that for air barriers, you do need to make sure that you're allowing for drying. Most most assemblies, understanding even if we do get the details perfect the day of construction, they will deteriorate from there. And so water and moisture will enter assemblies. And so being able to make sure that that moisture has a way to dry and get out of the assemblies rather than degrade is very important. So also part of this is trying to minimize air leakage around fenestration and purposeful penetrations and openings. So wherever you have penetrations for be it ductwork or line sets or plumbing piping, making sure that those get resealed and make it totally continuous again. So here is the big change. And what it is all new commercial buildings, commercial and industrial. So all residential and non-residential buildings will require air barrier compliance testing. Previously, the codes allowed for a specific, they had a listing of materials that could be used as part of air barrier compliance, saying as long as you used materials that were on this list, the air barrier was deemed to comply. However, now, and through recognition of the impacts and testing that's been done in the field, they've identified that while materials were air barriers, installation methods and techniques were not always up to par. And so the importance of actually testing and verifying that air barrier is complete and performing adequately. So this is also maybe known as envelope commissioning. We've commissioned HVAC systems and lighting systems, and understanding that envelopes have become more and more complex systems, so they also need to be commissioned as well. So there are a couple of standards depending on if you're in group I or R. Those dwelling and sleeping unit enclosures may be tested in accordance with the residential style of standard. For other buildings, then envelope testing is required using the commercial standard. That is something that the International Energy Conservation Code does have some exceptions listed. However, none of those apply here in the state of Illinois in climate zones 4A or 5A. So that's where all new commercial buildings in Illinois will be required to be pressure tested. Now, there is some provisions that we'll touch on in a little bit as far as sampling protocols. So part of this is checking the construction documents. This is also going to be very important for design professionals to make sure that you go through and outline where your air control layer is, and wherever an intersection of two materials or even just two joints come together, making sure that there is an appropriate detail of how to construct that air barrier to make sure that it is able to be continuous over time. So also part of this verification is there should be inspections as you're going through to make sure that those details are correct. And then your final commissioning, which is your testing, your blower door testing. That's where it is one of those that you definitely want to inspect as you go along, rather than trying to end up failing your test and then having to go back and try to find where the leaks occurred. So that can be a real challenge. So as far as if you have that group R or I for dwelling and sleeping units, here we measure at 50 pascals, so that's the lower residential pressure, air leakage not to exceed 0.3 CFM per square foot of unit enclosure area. So that's going to be all six sides of the cube, if you will. For multiple dwelling units in a single building, you do have some options. You can either test each unit individually, which generally would be preferred, such that you can verify that the envelope of each unit does isolate properly from one unit to the next. This will also help with sound transmission and potential cooking odor transmission and the like. So that's where that testing individually would be the preferred method. However, you can test the entire building and verify that envelope. And with that, you can use the weighted average for that. So if you do have a lot of multifamily, so there is a sampling protocol. So if you do have more than 8 units or more, you can use a sampling protocol that requires you to test at least 7 units or 20% of the total, whichever is greater. And with this sampling, be sure you're including your at least a unit on the top floor, the ground floor, and your unit with the largest enclosure area. So that's some flexibility for these multifamily buildings. On the commercial side, we're testing at the higher 75 pascals of pressure. So this is the higher commercial standard, and the air leakage not to exceed 0.4 CFM. So a little bit allows for a little bit more leakage, but it's because it's a higher test pressure. So for larger buildings, you can do some sampling. And the biggest thing is to make sure that the entire area that may be under that's directly under a roof is tested. Any area and spaces that have building entrances or exposed floor underneath. So if you have a parking underneath, that bottom floor is going to need to be done as well, or any loading docks or below grade. And then a 25% or more sampling of anything remaining beyond that. So understanding that we're going to go through some struggles to begin with. The code does have a provision in here if you don't hit your 0.4 CFM, but you are not greater than 0.6 CFM during your testing, then you are allowed to pass if you go through and do your diagnostic testing, typically through smoke testing or some other diagnostic testing method. Ultrasonic might be another common method. And then non-destructive remediation and documenting all the corrective actions you took for that. So again, that's where, particularly as we're doing early buildings, making sure that you're doing some of those visual inspections as you're going through construction, such that you don't end up failing the test at the end. Because if you are over that 0.6 CFM, then this allowance to do non-destructive remediation is not available. You have to go back and do remediation to pass. So. Operable opening interlock. So this is a newer requirement. So if you see this a lot more in new restaurants going in or other hospitality spaces where you have large overhead doors that people like to be able to open up when it's nice outside. So if you do have a door larger than 40 square foot to the outside that doesn't have an automatic closer on it, then you have to have an operable interlock with the HVAC settings, such that when the door is open, it disables the heating or cooling, or adjusts the set points to 55 or 90 respectively within 10 minutes of the door being open. So that is something that we are seeing as this becomes more common, having this interlock, because obviously when the door is open, trying not to just condition the entire outdoors doesn't work so well. So, as far as additional efficiency measures, previously in commercial buildings, they were required to just choose one measure and implement that. Most frequently, we saw that being the lower lighting power density that was selected for that measure. Now, For 2021, they have increased the number of measures, but assigned each of them points. Each point is worth approximately 0.25% energy savings. So now instead of just having any one measure, you now need to collect 10 points. And this varies based on occupancy group. So here's a kind of a look at that table, or there's several tables that are all consolidated here. The ones with a plus sign indicated on the left-hand side here. So the heat improvement, cooling improvement, reduced lighting power, and on-site renewable energy. These are provisions where you may be able to collect additional points above and beyond those that are indicated in the table if you have additional improvements beyond the minimum requirements for that. So, and your type of occupancy, as you see, dramatically impacts the point levels. So if you're in residential or institutional, we see a lot of point values on domestic water heating. Whereas if you're in Group B occupancies, reduced lighting power and renewable energy has a lot. So again, this kind of goes back to where do these buildings use a lot of their energy? And so if you improve that system that typically uses a lot, you're going to gain a lot of benefit for that. So with that, we've got one final poll question, and we'll continue answering some questions here. First question is, what is the difference between the commercial air leakage tests and dwelling unit test protocols? Is it the test pressure, the air leakage volume, the grace range for corrective action, or all of the above? The second question, what is the goal of achieving 10 additional efficiency package points? Is it to get a 2.5% improvement in building performance, 5% improvement, 7.5%, or 10% improvement?
Okay, while people are answering those poll questions, go back to our Q&A. So we've touched on, are there exceptions for the air leakage test of commercial buildings? Yes, there are, but none of them apply to climate zones 4 and 5A in Illinois. So for Illinois projects, all buildings will have to be pressure tested.
All new buildings.
Yes, new buildings. So touching on the R value question for tapered roof insulation, just to confirm, it is possible that there will be a decrease in the overall R value requirement in portions of the roof, but given parapet heights and typical manufacturer requirements for insulation installation, flashing, and things like that, the general construction practices should keep a relatively consistent R value across the roof and not have huge amounts of tapered insulation. You're not going to have like a foot of taper thickness change. You know, it's going to be a few inches where, you know, the average is generally going to be consistent across the roof, which was the original goal of the more confusing language in the 2018 IECC, to maintain that overall R value as consistently as possible, but still account for that variation with the taper, giving some credit for that. Ryan, question for the Illinois amendment about direction there, if the building's at a 45-degree angle for you.
Yeah, if you put it exactly on a 45-degree angle, I would have to check the definition as far as how to handle that if you put it exactly on the 45 where that is. I'd check the definition.
Next question, air control versus vapor control. Let's be clear, drywall executed in well executed is an air barrier. I believe you're talking about vapor control layer. So yes, the discussion about drying in a facility does touch on the vapor control layer, but the code does specify in its language for the air barrier that it's an or, either the interior, the exterior, or integral, not an and value there. And part of that is because a lot of times people will use air control layers that also work as vapor control layers, as a vapor retarder, most likely. And doubling those up can cause issues with trapping moisture in an assembly. So they're trying to stress a little bit there to be aware of the conditions you're constructing. But you are correct. It is a difference between an air control layer and a vapor control layer.
And drywall can be an an appropriate air control layer until you punch a hole in it to do an electrical box or anything else. So I think that's part of what they're trying to drive home. The point is how you install a material is much more important than the material itself, because you can install the right materials improperly, or you can install improper materials. So.
And to be clear there, this wasn't a change in language from and to or between the 2018 and 2021. It was more just clarifying language there, and that, but previously they just said you had to have a proper air control layer. And now they've clarified interior or exterior or integral. So the language was more an expansion than what was included in the 2018 IECC, and not necessarily a change from the and to the or. We'll go ahead and share our poll results before we jump into the last few questions here, just since we've got those in.
And looks like, yes, most people picked up that, yes, the difference between commercial and dwelling units is all of the above. So the pressure is higher in commercial, air leakage volume allowances is a little higher, and commercial has a corrective action grace range, whereas residential does not. And for the 10 points, we are trying to drive towards a 2.5% improvement. So 0.25% per point times 10 gives you 2.5% improvement for that. In the, I believe the 2024, they're increasing the number of points and decreasing the percent per point. So that's, again, just another tweak in the future.
Question from Gary here: is pressure testing of air barrier compliance required for both new construction and renovation of existing buildings? We touched on that earlier. It's just new construction that's required to have that pressure testing requirement. At what point in construction should that pressure testing occur? It's a good question.
Excellent question. Pressure testing can be conducted as soon as all planned purposeful penetrations of the building envelope have been made and sealed. So as soon as you have, you believe the envelope is complete, or the air barrier is complete, you can test. We do recommend you test as early as possible, just so that way you can make any corrective actions as early as possible. Also, what that will help for designers, particularly as if designers witness the testing, is they can learn where difficulties in construction have occurred, and so they can perhaps come up with better designs and more constructible designs that are easier to construct and more likely to be installed as designed, rather than something that may be very difficult to install because it got tucked in behind something else, or there was a hidden corner. So,
question here: are the heating and cooling improvements based on the ComCheck report? So the ComCheck report is based on the 2021 IECC requirements. So ComCheck has been updated. It does have the 2021 IECC requirements in it now. So as you're selecting the different efficiency options, it will account for those in your ComCheck, percent beyond code requirements. Those get calculated in. So yes, that would be included in there. As far as the heating and cooling systems, though, ComCheck really doesn't do a percent beyond code check there. It's only for lighting and envelope. On the heating and cooling side, it's more of a checklist, making sure that your fan efficiencies are properly meet the requirements in the HVAC section as far as fan efficacy and efficiency. And then it's checklist items to make sure that the rest of the HVAC stuff is accounted for. The 10 points, is that for existing facilities only?
The 10 points, this is going to be for new construction. They have to get that extra points as part of their design. So that's again another one of these new construction things, and that's where what this is this is done based on an energy analysis of different building types, and so that's why you end up with different building types have different point values assigned for them.
A couple more questions here. We're at time now, so if you need to go, we understand, but we'll try to answer a few more questions before we step off here. Do hotels have the same testing requirements as multi-dwellings or same as commercial buildings?
Hotels, I believe those may be Group R. And so if they are Group R buildings, they would use the Group R testing protocol. If they are something else, I'm blanking on what the other groups might be for hotels, they would then use the commercial. So Group R and I kind of are by themselves. Everything else is lumped together.
Do we have a summary, or will we have a seminar for the Chicago amendments?
I believe we do have some webinars coming up, or perhaps planned. I don't know that they have been firmed up yet on the Chicago Energy Transformation Code. So that may be coming in the near term here in the next couple of months.
Is the 2021 IECC available for viewing on the CDAC site? Found a link for purchase. So yes, we should have the link to the IECC's online viewing page. It should be the most current version of the 2021 IECC. They do release some new versions as they correct some errata in those documents. So it should be linked on our website. Confirming when the 2021 IECC will go into effect. At the current time, that is December 1st.
Yeah. That date may get delayed further, but December 1st is the earliest that 2021 would become in force in the state of Illinois. And again, that's based on your permit application date.
Okay, well, we've got a number of other questions, but we're running over time here. We'll try to answer those through email. We'll get in touch with you and answer those as best we can. So thank you all for attending today. If we didn't get to your question, we will try to contact you by email and answer those. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon.